Going through all this material for our deep dive today, really, I don't know, that Texas story is just wild.
Oh, yeah.
It really makes you think about how forensics, it's not just, solving some theoretical puzzle. It's about people's lives and real consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good reminder that
Yeah.
all this science we're talking about
Yeah,
has real-world impact, and
exactly.
it's not always pretty.
No, not always. But, before we get to that, we've got a ton of fascinating stuff to unpack, like the history of forensic science and
Yeah.
some truly unbelievable crime stories.
Yeah, what's really interesting to me is how these sources, they show how far we've come in forensics. From, basic identification methods to,
Yeah.
all the high-tech stuff we have today.
Right. Like we're going from fingerprinting to like analyzing DNA and using AI to solve crimes.
Exactly.
It's mind-blowing. So today we'll trace that whole evolution. We'll see how crimes are investigated now and maybe even try to peek into the future of forensics.
Yeah. Let's kick things off with a story from the late 1800s when the Bertillon system, this is pretty wild. They were trying to identify criminals by, get this, measuring their earlobes. It sounds crazy now, but yeah, that was cutting edge back then. Alphonse Bertillon. He meticulously cataloged all these measurements, convinced they were unique to each person.
Hmm. So were they on to something with this whole idea of unique physical measurements, or was it a total bust?
It was a good idea in theory. But then you had the case of Will West and William West in 1903. These two guys, totally unrelated, ended up in the same prison.
Yeah.
And they had almost identical Bertillon measurements.
Oh,
It
wow.
basically proved the system was flawed.
That's incredible. So I'm guessing this is what paved the way for fingerprints to become the gold standard?
Exactly. Fingerprints, they formed way back in the womb, influenced by genetics,
Mm.
the environment, and something called developmental noise.
Developmental noise. What's that?
Think of it like static in the system. Every fingerprint starts with a basic blueprint, but then gets distorted as it develops. So, the baby's position, pressure, even chemicals.
Hmm.
They all create those unique ridges and patterns.
Huh. That's fascinating.
It's why even identical twins, they have different fingerprints.
So you're saying no two fingerprints are the same?
In a world with billions of people, the odds of finding two identical prints, they're astronomically small.
Wow.
It was a game changer for catching criminals.
It makes you wonder if criminals back then, did they even know about fingerprints? Like, were they even trying to wipe them away? Speaking of which, this next story is, well, it's pretty chilling. It's from 1935 in England, the Saw murders. This doctor, he went to extreme lengths to hide the identities of his victims. He pulled teeth, destroyed eyes and ears, even tried to remove their fingerprints.
That's one way to try and get away with it, but it also shows how determined some criminals can be
Right.
and how dedicated forensic investigators are. Because even with all that, they still solved the case.
Really?
They used x-rays and other techniques to piece the bodies back together and match them to photos of the victims.
Wow, that's amazing.
It shows you there's no such thing as a perfect crime.
So much for that idea. It seems like no matter how hard they try, criminals always leave a trace. But what about cases where there's no body at all? You know that saying, no body, no murder?
Right. That saying, it came from stories like the one about William Harrison. This guy vanished back in 1660 in England, and they actually convicted 3 people for his murder.
Oh, wow.
But then, get this, he reappeared 2 years later. Turns out, he was kidnapped and sold into slavery.
Oh my gosh.
It made people think that without a body, you couldn't prove murder.
But that's not really true anymore, is it?
Not at all. Modern forensics can find traces of a crime even without a body, like DNA on tools or tiny bone fragments.
Like in Breaking Bad, they got rid of the body, but they still left evidence.
Exactly.
So even dissolving a body in acid, it doesn't guarantee you'll get away with it.
Nope.
That's good to know.
Speaking of evidence, let's talk about modern crime scene investigation. Imagine walking into a room where a crime just happened. There are millions of details, and every single thing you touch could mess up crucial evidence.
Oh, I can't even imagine the pressure. How do investigators even begin to process all that?
Well, back in the 1940s, Frances Glessner Lee, who's known as the mother of forensic medicine, she came up with this amazing idea. She created these incredibly detailed dollhouse replicas of crime scenes.
Wait, dollhouses? That's pretty creative.
They were perfect replicas, built to scale, with everything from blood spatters to furniture. She called them the nutshell studies of unexplained death, and they became invaluable training tools.
I can see how that would be helpful. So they could study the scene, look for clues, and practice their observation skills, all without contaminating the real crime scene.
Exactly.
That's brilliant.
And get this, some of these nutshell studies are still used today. You can even try your hand at solving mini murders based on them. We'll include a link in the show notes.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll definitely check that out. You know, it makes me think that detectives and scientists, they actually share a lot of the same skills.
Hmm.
Like evolutionary biologists or paleontologists, they're both piecing together clues from the past, right?
You're absolutely right. They both rely on observation,
Hmm.
gathering evidence, testing hypotheses, and connecting the dots.
It's like they're both detectives in a way.
Hmm.
One is looking for who committed a crime, and the other is looking for how life on Earth evolved. But the thinking process, it's remarkably similar.
Exactly.
It's all about asking the right questions and letting the evidence lead the way. Okay, so we've gone from measuring earlobes to analyzing microscopic evidence. What a journey. Now I'm really curious about what the 21st century holds for forensic science.
Me too. And that's what we'll be diving into next. I mean, it's really mind-blowing to think how much technology has changed things in forensics.
Yeah.
Drones, AI, rapid genetic sequencing. I mean, it's like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
I know. We're talking about creating 3D models of crime scenes from the air and analyzing huge data sets and even identifying people from just a tiny bit of DNA.
It's amazing what we can do now. For example, AI can be used to look at all that crime scene data and find patterns that we might miss as humans. And then there's genetic genealogy. They're using that to solve cold cases that have been mysteries for, decades.
It sounds like we're getting closer and closer to that, like, CSI fantasy, where they zoom in on a speck of dust and instantly know who did it.
Well, not quite. But all this advanced technology, it does raise some important questions.
Yeah, like what?
Well, like how do we balance these incredible advances with, with protecting people's privacy? Think about it. These genetic databases, they can help solve crimes, but they also raise concerns about how that information could be used.
Right.
I mean, what if insurance companies start using genetic data to deny coverage, or employers use it to discriminate against potential hires?
Yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword. This technology is amazing, but it could also be used in some pretty scary ways.
Exactly. And it's not just about privacy. We also need to think about accuracy. These technologies are powerful, but they're not perfect. We have to be really careful about how we interpret the data.
So it's not like they show it on TV where you get a DNA match and bam, case closed.
Not really. I mean, it's a lot more complex than that. There's always a chance of errors, and we can't forget about that.
So basically, technology is a tool, and it's up to us to make sure it's used for good.
Exactly. And that kind of brings us back to that personal story you mentioned, the one from Texas. It really highlights how forensic science affects real people.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So this happened while you were doing your PhD research in Texas, right?
Right. I was living in this motel-style building.
Yeah.
And I came home one evening, and I was greeted by, I don't know, it was like something out of a nightmare. Police cars, ambulances, fire trucks everywhere.
Oh, wow. What happened?
It turned out that my downstairs neighbor, this man who struggled with schizophrenia, he had killed his 4-year-old daughter.
Oh, my God.
It was just awful.
You were living right below him, so you must have heard something, right?
Yeah, I did. Before the police got there, I heard these, like, unsettling noises coming from their apartment. But at the time, I just thought they were moving furniture or something. I never imagined.
That's so chilling.
It was. When I found out what those sounds really were, it just sent shivers down my spine.
So did they catch the guy?
Yeah, they did. He actually tried to run, but they caught him. And in the end, he confessed to the crime.
And he was found guilty?
Yes.
What happened to him? Did he go to prison?
Well, that's where it gets complicated. His mental illness, it played a big role in the legal proceedings.
How so?
Because of his schizophrenia, they couldn't give him the death penalty.
Oh, I see.
It didn't excuse what he did, obviously, but it did affect the sentencing. In the end, he was committed to a mental hospital.
So basically a life sentence, but with psychiatric care.
Right.
It's a reminder that things aren't always black and white.
Yeah.
Sometimes the line between victim and perpetrator, it can be blurry.
Absolutely. And this wasn't just some case study. This was a tragedy that really shook the whole community. The house where it happened, it stayed empty for years. It was a constant reminder of what had happened there. Even after I moved out, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been so close to something so terrible.
That's heavy. I mean, it makes you realize that forensic science, it's not just about facts and evidence. It's about real people and the impact these crimes have on their lives.
You got it.
Like you said, it's not always pretty.
Not at all.
I think it's interesting how we've been talking about these two sides of forensic science. On one hand, you have these amazing technological advancements, but on the other hand, you have these really complex ethical and human questions.
Exactly. And as we move into this future of, high-tech crime solving,
Yeah.
those questions are only going to become more important.
So, where do we go from here? We've talked about everything from measuring earlobes to analyzing DNA and using AI to solve crimes. Forensic science has come a long way, but it seems like every step forward comes with new questions and challenges. So, what does all this mean for the future of crime and punishment?
Yeah, it does feel like we're standing on the edge of something brand new. We have these incredible tools,
Yeah,
but we're still learning how to use them wisely.
I know what you mean. It's like those old stories about genies in a bottle. You get these amazing powers, but there's always a catch.
Huh, that's a great way to put it. We have this incredible power to solve crimes and bring justice, but we have to be very careful about the consequences.
Like we were talking about earlier with those genetic databases, what happens if, down the road, we can actually predict if someone's going to commit a crime just based on their genes?
It's a question that's on a lot of people's minds these days. Scientists, ethicists, you name it. I mean, if we find certain genetic markers, do we step in before a crime even happens?
It's a slippery slope, isn't it?
It is. And then there's the whole issue of bias in the algorithms we use. I mean, these aren't just hypotheticals. They have real implications for justice and individual freedom.
It almost feels like a philosophical debate. Like, if our genes influence our behavior, does that mean we're less responsible for our actions?
Right. It's a debate that's been going on forever.
Yeah.
And forensic science is just making it even more complicated. But, we've talked a lot about the science. But what about the human side of all this? The emotions, the trauma, the ripple effects that go way beyond the crime scene.
Yeah, you're right. We can't forget about the human cost of crime. Behind every DNA sample, every fingerprint, there's a story.
Exactly.
A victim, a perpetrator, families torn apart, communities living in fear.
And those stories matter. We can't just focus on the science and forget about the people involved.
I think you've hit on something really important here. Forensic science, it's not just about cold, hard facts. It's about seeking the truth, understanding why people do what they do, and using our knowledge to make the world a better place.
Exactly. And that's something I really hope our listeners take away from this deep dive today.
Yeah.
We've explored the history, the science, the challenges of forensics. But in the end, it's up to all of us, as individuals and as a society, to decide how we use this knowledge.
We've definitely given everyone a lot to think about, and it's clear that this conversation is far from over. So keep exploring these questions, keep learning, and keep challenging those assumptions about crime and punishment. The future of forensics and the future of justice depends on it.
Well said. Until next time, stay curious, keep asking questions, and keep digging deeper into the world around you.